We have such a good thing as pals, she insisted when I asked where we stood after 2 years, so I agreed, found better things, and built a life without her drama. Now she's third-wheeling other couples while I plan a surprise proposal for the woman who never called me her pal. Hey folks, before we jump into the video, please consider subscribing and giving a thumbs up if you like seeing karma work faster than expected. Thank you. Let's dive in. I'm a marine biologist working in Charleston, and for 2 years I thought I was in something that resembled a relationship with Melody, an architectural consultant who designed coastal properties around the area. We did everything couples do, regular dinners at waterfront restaurants, weekend trips to Savannah where we'd explore historic districts and share hotel rooms, movie nights on her couch where she'd fall asleep against my shoulder, and we'd even started spending holidays with each other's families like we were building something real together. My parents loved her thoughtful questions about my research, and her mom always saved me a seat at their Thanksgiving table. So when I finally worked up the courage to ask where we stood, I genuinely expected her to smile and say what I'd been hoping to hear for months. We were sitting at Fleet Landing, this restaurant right on the water where you can watch dolphins swim past while you eat, and I'd been rehearsing my words all week because I'm not great with emotional conversations, but this felt important enough to get right. Melody, I've been thinking about us lately, about what we are to each other, and I guess I'm wondering if you see this going somewhere more serious. She laughed, not the happy laugh I was hoping for, but this nervous giggle that made my stomach drop, and she started playing with her wine glass like she suddenly couldn't look directly at me. Oh Grant, we have such a good thing as pals though, don't we? I mean, look at us, we can go anywhere together, we never fight, we have zero drama. Why would we want to complicate something so perfect? I felt like someone had just told me my research grant got rejected, that hollow disappointment where you realize you've been working towards something that was never going to happen. I just thought maybe we were already more than pals, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We spend almost every weekend together, we've met each other's families, we even have that trip planned to the Outer Banks next month. She reached across the table and patted my hand like I was her confused little brother. And that's exactly why this works so well. We get all the benefits of a relationship without any of the messy expectations or pressure. I've seen too many good friendships get ruined when people try to make them into something they're not. I stared out at the harbor where a pelican was diving for fish, probably having better luck with his pursuit than I was having with mine, and realized I'd been living in a complete fantasy for 2 years. You're right, I said, signaling for the check. We should probably head home. That night, instead of processing rejection like a normal person, I opened my laptop and started browsing job postings with the National Oceanic Institute, specifically looking for positions that would require relocation, because I'm apparently the type of guy who responds to emotional devastation by researching career opportunities in other states. Over the next few weeks, I started what I called my graceful withdrawal strategy, which basically meant slowly reducing our one-on-one time without making it obvious that I was protecting my own sanity. When Melody texted about our usual Saturday morning coffee runs, I'd respond with something like, "Can't make it this week, got pulled into an emergency data analysis for the coastal erosion project," which wasn't technically a lie since I was genuinely throwing myself into work to avoid thinking about how stupid I'd been for 2 years. She'd suggest our typical weekend trips to Savannah or those movie marathons where we'd order way too much Chinese food and she'd inevitably fall asleep during the second film, and I'd counter with, "Why don't we invite Jake and Maria? They've been wanting to explore the historic district," effectively turning our intimate hangouts into group activities where I could maintain some emotional distance. Melody seemed completely oblivious to the shift, still sending me daily texts about her latest architectural projects and expecting me to respond with the same level of enthusiasm I'd always shown for her work designing those expensive waterfront condos. "Grant, you have to see this ridiculous client request. They want a 3-story glass wall facing the ocean during hurricane season. Can you believe it?" She'd write, followed by laughing emojis and photos of her blueprints, apparently expecting me to drop everything and analyze the structural implications like I was her personal consulting engineer. I started spending my free time volunteering as a guide at the Charleston Aquarium, something I'd always meant to do but never had time for when I was busy being Melody's unofficial boyfriend, and joined the local sailing club where I could actually use my marine knowledge to help with their conservation efforts. These new activities created a completely separate social circle that didn't include Melody, filled with people who shared my genuine interests rather than just tolerating them because we were pals. When she'd ask about my sailing lessons or my work with the aquarium's education program, I'd give brief, friendly responses but never invite her to join, keeping these new parts of my life as my own space where I could rediscover who I was without her constant presence. "Oh, that sounds fun. Maybe I could come watch you sail sometime. I've always thought sailing looked so peaceful, she'd suggest, and I'd respond with something neutral like, yeah, it's pretty great for clearing your head, without offering any specific invitation because I was learning that protecting my emotional boundaries meant saying no to things that would hurt me in the long run. It was during one of my volunteer shifts at the Charleston Aquarium that I met Iris, a veterinarian who specialized in marine animal rehabilitation and had this way of talking about ocean conservation that made my nerdy passion for coastal ecosystems seem actually interesting instead of just tolerable. She was consulting on a rescued sea turtles recovery program, and when I explained the water temperature regulation system we used for injured marine life, she asked follow-up questions that showed she actually understood the science rather than just nodding politely like most people do when I start talking about salinity levels and thermal gradients. That's fascinating. Have you considered how climate change might be affecting their natural thermoregulation abilities? She asked, and I realized I was talking to someone who saw my work as genuinely important rather than just a quirky hobby that paid the bills. Our connection felt immediate and honest, with Iris treating me like a potential romantic partner from our first conversation instead of keeping me trapped in some ambiguous friendship zone where I had to guess what every interaction meant. We started taking weekend boat trips together to study dolphin pod behaviors, and she'd pack lunches for both of us and suggest we watch the sunset afterward, making it clear these were dates without having to play guessing games about her intentions. I love how passionate you get when you're explaining marine migration patterns, she told me one evening as we anchored near Folly Beach, watching dolphins surface around our boat. It's incredibly attractive when someone truly cares about their work. While I was discovering what it felt like to be with someone who actually wanted to be with me, Melody started noticing my reduced availability and began inserting herself into our friend group activities more aggressively, always finding reasons to stay longer than everyone else at gatherings and trying to maintain her position as my closest friend, even though I was clearly pulling away. She'd show up to Jake and Maria's dinner parties and immediately position herself next to me, launching into stories about our weekend trips to Savannah or that time we got caught in a thunderstorm hiking at Congaree National Park, like she was marking her territory with shared memories. When my sailing club friends mentioned my new girlfriend during a casual conversation at a harborside bar, Melody's face went through this series of expressions: confusion, shock, then something that looked almost like betrayal, as if I'd somehow violated the terms of our pal agreement by finding someone who actually wanted to date me. Girlfriend? I didn't know Grant was seeing anyone, she said, trying to sound casual but failing completely. We tell each other everything. Except we clearly didn't, and her assumption that she deserved to know every detail of my personal life was exactly the kind of entitled thinking that had kept me stuck in her friend zone for 2 years, thinking I owed her access to my emotions without getting anything real in return. My relationship with Iris deepened naturally as we started taking research trips together to the Outer Banks, where we'd spend long weekends documenting sea turtle nesting patterns and staying in these small coastal bed and breakfasts that felt like actual romantic getaways instead of ambiguous friend hangouts. Iris openly called me her boyfriend when introducing me to her colleagues at the veterinary clinic, and we started making long-term plans together like applying for joint research grants and discussing which conferences we wanted to attend next year, never sending mixed signals or keeping me guessing about where I stood in her life. I'm thinking we should submit that proposal for the Marine Mammal Symposium in San Diego, she'd say over breakfast, using like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I realized this was what it felt like to be with someone who saw us as a team rather than just convenient companionship. Meanwhile, Melody began showing up uninvited to group gatherings where Iris and I were present, positioning herself as the fun single friend, but clearly trying to monopolize my attention with inside jokes about our old adventures and shared memories that excluded everyone else from the conversation. At Jake and Maria's barbecue, she'd sidle up to me while I was talking with Iris about upcoming dive certification classes and interrupt with something like, "Grant, remember that time we got lost trying to find that hidden beach near Kiowa and ended up eating gas station sandwiches for dinner?" Forcing me to acknowledge our history while making Iris feel like an outsider to our supposedly special bond. She started third-wheeling other couples in our friend group when I wasn't available, becoming that person who always needed a +1 invitation but never brought her own date, showing up to restaurants and movie nights as the single tag-along who'd make pointed comments about how nice it must be to have someone to share popcorn with. "I love being the independent single friend," she'd announce a little too loudly when couples would share appetizers or hold hands, but her tone suggested the opposite as she'd glance in my direction to see if I was paying attention to her performance. I noticed Melody's increasingly desperate behavior but maintained polite boundaries, treating her with the same courtesy I'd show any casual acquaintance rather than engaging with her attempts to recreate our old dynamic where I'd drop everything to listen to her problems or analyze her latest dating disasters. When she tried to pull me aside for private conversations about how she was struggling with loneliness or career stress, I'd respond with something like, "That sounds tough, you should talk to someone about that," and then smoothly return to whatever group conversation was happening, refusing to be her emotional support system when she'd made it clear I wasn't worth the risk of an actual relationship. As Iris and I became more serious, moving in together to a waterfront apartment near the aquarium and even adopting a rescue sea turtle named Neptune for rehabilitation in our spare bedroom's custom tank setup, Melody's third-wheeling behavior became increasingly obvious and desperate in ways that made our entire friend group uncomfortable. She'd crash couples dinners at nice restaurants, always finding excuses to stay longer than everyone else and making pointed comments like, "Some people just rush into living together without really thinking it through," while staring directly at Iris and me across the table, as if her opinion on our relationship timeline mattered to anyone present. Melody started dating sporadically, going on dates with guys she'd meet through dating apps or her architectural firm, but she'd spend the entire evening comparing every man to me and complaining to mutual friends about how no one gets her sense of humor like Grant did, and how impossible modern dating had become for someone with high standards. "He was nice enough, but he didn't laugh at my stories the way Grant always did," she'd tell Maria over coffee, apparently forgetting that I used to laugh at her stories because I was desperately trying to be the perfect friend she might eventually want to date, not because she was actually that funny. She began showing up at the Charleston Aquarium during my volunteer shifts, claiming she'd always been secretly interested in marine life, and asking if she could shadow me while I gave educational tours to school groups, trying to insert herself into the world I'd built with Iris. "I never knew how fascinating sea turtle rehabilitation could be," she'd say, standing awkwardly close while I explained our temperature monitoring systems to a group of middle schoolers, completely ignoring the fact that she'd never shown even mild curiosity about my work during our 2 years of supposed friendship. I remained professionally polite during these encounters, treating her like any other aquarium visitor and never engaging beyond basic courtesy about exhibit information or conservation efforts, while Iris handled the situation with remarkable grace and confidence, never showing jealousy or asking me to ban Melody from public spaces. "She's trying really hard to get your attention," Iris observed one evening after Melody had spent an entire Saturday following us around the touch tank exhibits and asking increasingly irrelevant questions about starfish regeneration. "It's almost sad, watching someone realize they've lost something they never bothered to value when they had it." The most pathetic incident came when Melody started bringing random dates to group activities, clearly trying to make me jealous with a parade of men who looked increasingly confused about why they were being dragged to marine biology lectures or sailing club social events where they obviously didn't belong, and she'd spend the entire time watching my reactions instead of paying attention to her actual companions. After 18 months together, I started secretly planning an elaborate proposal for Iris, coordinating with the aquarium staff to arrange a private after-hours proposal in the shark tunnel where we'd first met during that sea turtle consultation, surrounded by swimming rays and nurse sharks in what would essentially be an underwater cathedral of marine life. I involved our mutual friends Jake and Maria in the planning process, asking them to help coordinate the perfect timing and ensure we'd have a photographer to capture the moment, carefully making sure Melody wasn't included in any of these discussions while still maintaining our group friendships for everyone else's sake. The proposal planning required weeks of coordination with the aquarium's events team, selecting the perfect ring that reflected Iris's practical nature but also her love of ocean-inspired jewelry, and timing everything around her work schedule at the veterinary clinic and our shared research commitments, all while keeping it completely secret from someone who was incredibly observant about marine ecosystems and conservation efforts. When Melody started discovering through social media posts and overheard friend conversations that something significant was being planned within our social circle, she became increasingly frantic and desperate, showing up at more events uninvited and trying to reconnect with me directly through long, rambling text messages that made my phone buzz at inappropriate times. "Grant, I feel like we haven't really talked in months, and I miss our old connection," she wrote in a message that arrived while Iris and I were testing water temperature equipment for Neptune's rehabilitation tank. "I know things have been different since you started dating, but our friendship was always special, and I think we need to clear the air between us before something permanent happens that we might regret." I read her increasingly desperate messages during my lunch breaks at work, each one revealing more about how she'd finally realized what she'd lost by keeping me in the pal zone, when I'd been ready to offer her everything I was now building with Iris, but I responded only with brief, polite acknowledgments that gave her nothing to latch onto. "Thanks for reaching out, hope you're doing well," I'd reply, treating her texts the same way I'd respond to updates from distant college acquaintances, because that's essentially what she'd chosen to be when she decided our perfect friendship was too valuable to risk on something as messy as an actual romantic relationship. The proposal happened on a Tuesday evening in March, with the aquarium's shark tunnel transformed into the most magical underwater setting I could have imagined, as Iris and I walked through the curved glass corridor surrounded by gentle nurse sharks, stingrays, and schools of colorful fish swimming overhead like living stars in an ocean sky. When I dropped to one knee and opened the ring box, explaining how she'd made me believe in the kind of partnership I'd given up hoping to find, Iris immediately said yes through happy tears while a massive ray glided directly above us in what felt like the ocean's own blessing on our engagement. "I can't believe you coordinated all this," she laughed, admiring the ring while a sea turtle slowly swam past the glass behind her, and I realized this was what it felt like to surprise someone who actually wanted to spend her life with me rather than someone who saw commitment as a threat to her independence. Our engagement announcement spread through social media and our friend group within hours, with congratulations pouring in from colleagues, family members, and sailing club friends who'd watched our relationship develop naturally from shared interests into genuine love, while I noticed Melody's conspicuous silence among all the celebration messages. I found out later from Maria that Melody had spent that entire evening refreshing social media feeds from her apartment, eating takeout Chinese food alone while watching our engagement photos get dozens of likes and comments from people celebrating our happiness, finally understanding that she'd lost something irreplaceable by treating love like a risk instead of an opportunity. Her final attempt to contact me came 3 days after the engagement announcement, a message that started with congratulations but quickly devolved into subtle hints about our special history and suggestions that we should celebrate as old friends, since our bond had always been different from regular friendships, as if I owed her some kind of closure meeting after she'd spent years keeping me at arm's length. I showed the message to Iris, who read it with raised eyebrows and said, "She still doesn't get it, does she? She's trying to position herself as the woman who knew you first, like that gives her some kind of claim on your emotional energy." And after discussing it together, I blocked Melody's number and removed her from my social media connections, finally cutting the last threads of access she'd assumed she'd always have to my life. 6 months later, as Iris and I planned our oceanside wedding ceremony at Folly Beach with a reception featuring locally sourced seafood and marine conservation information for our guests, I heard through Jake that Melody was still third-wheeling other couples' date nights and dinner parties, forever the single friend who needed +1 invitations but never brought her own partner, apparently still telling people that she valued her independence too much to settle for anything less than perfect, which I suppose was technically true since she'd already met perfect and called it friendship instead.